Stacey Murphy here with a video about seeding indoors in trays. And this is something that you would do for a couple of different reasons. One is that maybe you're trying to grow transplants that you're going to put into your garden at a later date. You might be growing greens indoors because it's too hot or too cold outside to grow your greens outside, so you choose to grow them indoor. Or possibly you just don't have the space outdoor to grow all of your greens, and so this is a way to grow some of your food indoor. And what you want to make sure is that you watch the video on indoor grow lamps. You really can't grow indoors without additional light. You really need that light. A windowsill is not enough sunlight to grow seedlings indoors. All right, with that said, there's just a couple materials that you need, and on the screen is a tray. There's nothing special about this tray. I grabbed it for free at the store when I was picking up some other supplies. It has some drainage holes in the bottom. That's a good thing. So that's one thing that's important, are some drainage holes, but other than that, the tray can look like anything. And then I have my potting mix in this case because they didn't have seed starting mix at the store. You want to take a look at the video on materials so you can see the difference between potting mix and seed starting mix and topsoil and when to use each one of those things. And then I've got my seeds, and I'm going to basically get started now growing my seeds indoors. So I'm going to make sure that my mixture that I'm going to grow my seeds in is moist, and you'll see that this is very dry. If I grip it in my hand, if I try to ball it up, if I grab it and squeeze it, it doesn't form a ball. It basically just falls apart. That means it's not holding any moisture. We want our mixture to be moist. It's what's called hydrophilic, meaning water loving. We want it to be moisture loving so that when we water our seedlings, that the water soaks into that mixture really well. What happens if it's hydrophobic, meaning that it is afraid of water, so to speak, is that it will repel water, and the water will basically roll off the surface of our mixture, and our precious seeds won't get the water that they need. So basically what I'm doing is I'm dumping water into the seed starting mix or the potting mix, and I'm mixing it up. And if I had a larger container, this would be much easier. I could do this without having the fear of spilling it everywhere. But in this case, I'm being a little bit more gentle. And I'm mixing that water in. I'm trying to get all the way down to the bottom and make sure that every part has a nice amount of moisture. So how do I know that it's enough moisture? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a handful and I'm going to squeeze it really hard in my hand. And basically, if it holds together and it looks like it's holding together decently, but it still needs maybe a little bit more water, then I know that I'm getting close. Now, if I squeeze it and water starts to squeeze out of my hand, that means I have too much water and I want to add a little bit more media into the mixture so that I can dry it out a little bit more. But so what I found was that I was close but not quite there. So how do you know what it looks like when you're ready? When I think it feels about right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do that technique again where I squeeze it into a ball. And when I do that, when I squeeze it into that ball, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can hold that ball between my finger and my thumb. And if it doesn't fall apart, then it's good. And it actually doesn't fall apart. But when I tap it with my hand, it does crumble. So that's the right consistency. And you can see my hands are dirty as well. So that's how you know you're the right consistency. All right, now with my tray, I want to make sure that I have sterilized my tray before I get started, and there is a note about that in the materials video. And then in this particular case, because I'm going to keep this tray indoors, I basically put down a little bit of newspaper to cover those openings in the bottom. Water can still seep out, but what happens when I put the newspaper in is that it's going to hold in the media so that indoors I don't get that media leaching out through the bottom of those holes. Just a little bit of water can come out the bottom. And now I'm going to dump in my medium that is hydrophilic, water loving, it's moist. And I'm basically going to spread it evenly in the tray. And what I'm going for is about an inch depth of seed starting mix or potting mix in this case, because I'm basically growing in some cases for transplant outdoors, and in other case I'm going to be growing some greens. 1 inch is deep enough for what I'm doing, and will give my seeds plenty of space to spread out. So I'm going to basically spread this evenly. I'm not being too precious. I'm pressing down a little bit. I don't want to punch it down. I don't want to like make it really solid. I want to keep it nice and loose, but I do want to make it sort of even. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You're going to see that the surface of this will have its ups and its downs, and it still works. It doesn't have to be perfect for it to work. What I'm doing is I'm just making sure that I have about the right amount and that it's about the right depth. So I'm taking a little bit out because I'm realizing that it's a little bit deeper than I need, and I like to conserve my resources and have extra potting mix for another time. Okay, so here you see me pretty much finalizing that depth level, and then using my finger to make sure that it's the right depth. And I know that my first knuckle is about 1 inch deep. My second knuckle is 2 inches deep. So I'm going to make sure that it goes up to my first knuckle. And it does. So that is the right depth for my seed starting mix. So you could always use your hands for measurement. You don't need rulers or anything else. All right, so I'm ready to plant my first seeds, and this particular tray had those 6 little areas, so I'm going to plant 6 different seeds in each one of those different areas. So the first section, I'm going to put in my purplet onions, and you can see the seeds here. They are black. They almost look like pyramids. Most onion seeds are black. And what I'm going to do with these seeds, when I'm looking at how many to plant, what I like to do is separate out what does 10 seeds look like compared to the rest. You can see in my hand there that was probably about 100 seeds if you look at how many 10 looked like, and then there's probably 100. So I'm going to go ahead and just sprinkle them around. I'm not going to be too precious, and I'm planting about half of them. So I probably planted about 50 onion seeds there. And then I'm going to grab my next seeds, which are kale. These are things that I'm going to transplant. Both those onions and these kale I'm going to transplant. So I don't need that many kale seeds because kale grow up to be big plants. So I'm only planting a couple. Looks like about 20 seeds, and I'm basically just going to sprinkle them evenly around the mix. And when I'm planting for transplant later, the important thing is that they aren't balled up on top of each other so that I can easily remove each seed. Now I'm going to grow some greens mix. I'm going to grow for some lettuce. So I'm going to plant this really densely. So I have a little area that I'm probably going to plant about 100 seeds in this little area. So I'm going to plant all of those seeds, and I'm going to get a nice lush carpet of greens that I can basically cut, and they will come back, and I can have lettuce in this area for quite some time. This particular mix is a spicy lettuce mix, and you'll see later what it looks like. The next seeds I'm going to plant are some sweet Thai basil. Now generally basil comes up pretty quickly. I like to plant basil pretty densely because I love basil. So I like to plant quite a handful of it. You'll see there's quite a few seeds there. There's probably 50 seeds there. And I'm going to put this in this little area and pretty densely. When you're transplanting basil, a lot of times you're pulling multiple plants out at a time. So it's okay if they're on top of each other. So I just kind of dump them in. Now I'm going to put in some baby beets. Now these are, if I'm going to transplant my baby beets, I want them far enough apart so that I can transplant easily. So I'm only going to plant maybe between 10 and 20 beets. And so I'm going to very carefully make sure that those seeds are spread out and that they aren't on top of each other, because that's going to make it hard later to transplant them. So I'm being a little bit more careful with these, you'll see. And I'm kind of placing them where there's openings. Notice I'm spending way more time on these than I did with any of the other seeds. All right, and the last ones I'm going to plant are some bok choy. And with the bok choy, these I can plant them as something that I could cut as like a salad mix, or I could plant as transplants. So I'm going to put in about a medium amount. I'm going to put in about 20 plants. And most likely I'm going to transplant these into my garden. So I'm going to be a little bit careful, and I'm going to spread them kind of evenly around versus just dumping them in all at once. And just making sure that I'm filling the area, and that's it. And then from here, what I want to do is I want to take a handful of some mix and basically cover those seeds up. Now, most of the seeds are small, and so they only need about 1/8 of an inch of covering, and so you'll notice it's just like a little sprinkle, a little handful over each little section. But the one area that's a little bit different is coming up the beet area, which is the next section, and you'll see me dump maybe a little bit more there. I'll probably go back for another handful and put another handful in that same spot after I'm done, just so that those beets are truly covered up. The beet seeds are a little bit bigger and do need a little bit more covering. All right, so once you have your tray of seeds and they're covered with a little bit of mixture, you want to water these in really good. And I like to do this first step outside if possible. I like to take them outside, put them on the ground, pick up my hose. And what I'm going to do is, instead of being right on top of the plants with my hose, what would happen if I turned on the hose now and gave it a blast is that basically the soil mixture would fly every which direction and seeds would fly every which direction. So you want to rain down like gentle rain, basically. So I'm going to take a couple steps back, and I'm going to make sure that I water the whole tray. So I want to water beyond the edges because I want to make sure that the edges get as much water as the center. So I'm going to go gentle strokes back and forth across the tray to water it. Make sure that it is fully moist. Now that your seeds are completely moist, you want to find a home for them indoors. And it's very important that you find a location that you're going to see all the time. So I put these in my bedroom. This is a bookshelf right across from my bed. You want to make sure that these are something that are in your life. If they are out of your peripheral vision, something can happen very quickly and you might lose them. So you want to be able to notice them every day when you wake up and when you go to bed. So this is right next to my bed, and there's a video on setting up grow lamps. Check that out if you want to set up some grow lamps, and I highly recommend them. You won't have enough sunlight off of a windowsill to grow healthy seedlings. Okay, so what this looks like is essentially I've put my tray of seeds on top of another tray so that if any water leaks out, it doesn't land on my bookshelf. It basically lands inside of that water tray. And then I can lift this whole thing up by putting books underneath that tray to get this closer to the light. And I really want to get my plants within a couple inches of the light if possible. 6 inches maximum, a couple inches off the surface of the soil will ensure that you get really healthy plants. I know it seems like it's crazy, but they actually need that much light. Okay, so you found your home. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to continue to water these and watch them grow. And what I would recommend for watering is using a spray bottle when you have babies that haven't yet really sprouted too much. They don't require too much moisture except for keeping that surface moist all the time. So if you use a spray bottle and as long as you've started them off really moist, you're going to have an easy time keeping them moist. So that's why I recommend really getting them moist to begin with. And then all you'll need to do, I find, is twice a day when I go to bed and when I wake up, I take my spray bottle and I spray the surface really well, make sure that it's very moist. Now, as they get older, they might need a little bit more water. So here you see day 2, there's actually no sprouting really going on. But by day 4, you start to see that lettuce mix is growing. And this is super cool. You've already got seeds growing. You want to keep that surface moist. And you'll notice that the surface is not super even, right? It's got texture to it. It doesn't matter. Those seeds are still going to grow. Nature is very resilient. And then here's day 5. You can see that lettuce mix really picking up. In the center there is the kale, and in the far left is the bok choy. So those are all happening first. You can start to see the red starts of beets in the middle upper part of the screen. Those beets are starting to seed as well. And now on day 6, you can see that the onions start to come up. So that's exciting. Onions are a little bit different than the other crops. They are what are called a monocot. They're going to send out 1 leaf versus 2 leaves. Everything else sends out 2 leaves when it begins. 2 leaves are called dicots. So onions look a little bit different when they sprout, and in a couple days you'll see more of what I mean. And now on day 7, we see everything starting to sprout. You'll notice that the basil was the last thing to sprout. That's atypical of basil. Basil usually sprouts really early, but because that was an Asian basil, it took a little bit longer to sprout. You can see those beet seeds starting to really sprout as well, and the onions are really starting to poke up as well. And now that those greens are starting to grow in, those guys are actually requiring more water. What I'm noticing is that a spray bottle is not enough and that I'm having to go in and actually pour water very gently into that area. And I could do that for all the areas as these things start to get larger.